All right. So Ian Ritter.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, this is my first time doing an interview. I've been interviewed before, so this is a little new for me.
Mm-hmm.
But kind of excited to do this and excited to meet you. We don't really
Likewise.
know each other. This
Right.
is just our first meeting.
Mm-hmm.
But I came across you during an Abdia Sadi interview
Mm-hmm.
you guys did, a
Mm-hmm.
podcast video.
Yeah.
And Abdi Assadi is someone who has been influential in my life. I haven't interacted with him personally, but read his book, follow a lot of his content.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you were being interviewed by him, you had mentioned Dark Night of the Soul, that was
Mm-hmm.
an experience that you had. And
Yeah.
I was really curious because I've had a Dark Night of the Soul experience too. So
Right.
I reached out to you to
Mm-hmm.
see, was there more content, was something more I could, and you said, no, not really, but that you would be willing to chat about it and
Mm-hmm.
maybe even record it in case there's other people that might be interested in this too. So I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah. My
So
pleasure.
this is us just kind of meeting for the first time and
Right.
talking about a topic that can be pretty sensitive for people
Mm-hmm.
to talk about.
Yeah.
And so I think we're just going to dive in. Let me just say, I don't know that much about you. I know that you're a healer. You've been doing this for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
You have your own website, you have your own podcast, you have your
Mm-hmm.
own, I think, YouTube channel. I subscribe to that.
Mm-hmm.
You're a healer. You have different training that you've done.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe if you could just introduce yourself a little bit as
Sure.
far as who you are and what you do
Yeah.
as a starting place, and then we can maybe dive into the dark night of the soul conversation, if that
Yeah.
works.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, first of all, I'm Italian. So that's why most of my content is in Italian. But I have, I've been to an American school in the first 9 years of my life. And then I've studied at the Barbara Brennan School of Healing for 6 years. And a lot of my life has been in English, basically. So when I graduated at the Barbara Brennan School of Healing, I mean, my life has been, I've been most of my life a musician, a teacher, an actor for voiceover. And only at a certain point of my life, I decided to drastically change my life and go into, I became a product manager for Apple, Apple Italy. So that didn't last much because, multinational is definitely where I wanted to be. But that's where I met. Honestly, I've always been on a spiritual path, but for the first time, I realized there were actual schools that, for you to work on yourself and help others work on themselves. So when I started this, and when I started the school, I never thought I'd become a healer. I just want to work on myself as much as I could because there
Sure.
were many things that I felt I was having a really hard time with. And, from there, after a handful of years, I realized that might have been actually the way to go. And, after a short while, I decided to stop working for Apple and started doing this full time.
Gotcha.
So, yeah, I mean, I started as an energy healer. And then as I'm passionate about psychology and one-on-one, dialogue therapy, I became a counselor. And that's what I've been doing for the last 20 years, 18, 20
Beautiful.
years.
Yeah, you clearly have a lot of gifts to share. In just reading what you wrote about yourself on your website, to me
Mm,
it seemed like you really focused on your sensitivity. So I'm a
right,
sensitive person,
right.
and coming into embracing that as a gift to you, but
Mm,
also something that you have to share with other people.
yeah.
Um, so maybe that will be a part of what we talk about in
Well,
the
that's
Dark Night of the
huge.
Soul
And thanks for
process.
bringing it up because,
Yeah.
I mean, my sensitivity was the reason I suffered so much. There was so much discomfort in my life because
Mhm.
being so sensitive. But I realized, as I worked on it, that my sensitivity was also the tool through which I could help others understand themselves. I could empathize so strongly with others, and having
Mm.
the tools and having the experience of working with that sensitivity, I could help others, ground themselves, structure themselves, work through their stuff, and rather
Sure.
than, blaming their sensitivity for their suffering, actually
Sure.
feel it as a blessing in disguise.
Yeah, sort of that thing that has maybe felt like a liability becoming a gift for you in your life.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Good. Well, I appreciate you sharing a little bit about yourself and your
Mm,
journey. I'm just
mm,
going to open the door to really whatever it is that you feel like you would want to share. Let me backtrack a little bit. We talked a little bit about, as preparing for this through email or just before
mhm.
chatting,
Yeah.
that, to sort of come out about, psychological issues, dark night of the soul issues, things like that.
Mhm.
Um, you know, Regardless of where you have sort of an Italian perspective, cultural
Yeah.
influences on that, but it's still
Yeah.
something that can have some shame attached to it or some stigma attached to it.
Absolutely.
And so, again, we want to be respectful of sort of how it is that we talk about this from
Yeah.
that light. And I appreciate your willingness to just sort of kind of go out there with it. But with that said, I'd like to just open the door for you on whatever it is makes sense for you to share about your dark night of the soul experience.
Yeah. Sure. So the way I envisioned this talk was to go step by step chronologically how it evolved into the actual dark night of the soul. Because as a very sensitive child, adolescent, young adult, and adult, so much was going on within me. So much I was experiencing, and I was suffering. The suffering was very intense, which was a mixture of the pain of what I was, of my childhood trauma, and at the same time, the rejection of my sensitivity, of my pain, of my, what I back then viewed as weaknesses. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't like being weak.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, I was extremely needy. I did struggle with emotional dependency, and my relationships were all kind of tormented. And I realized only later that throughout all those, maybe 30, 35 years, I was, I had an undiagnosed depression and anxiety disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And truly living for 30 years with that kind of condition and not knowing it
Mm-hmm.
is surreal, is literally surreal, because I had no idea anti-anxiety pills existed. And I wanted to stay away from anything that made me feel, unwell, sick, but I was unwell. So that was my story for 30 years, sort of
Mm-hmm.
navigating through some different forms of compensation for a deep anxiety that, it's just the flip side of depression. And really living my life trying to find ways to get out of that state of constant discomfort. So,
Mm-hmm.
be it finding the best job I could, getting the best gig as a musician as I could,
Mm-hmm.
buying guitars,
Mm-hmm.
going to bed with as many women as I could. I was
Mm-hmm.
in search. I was searching. At the same time, I did find spirituality quite early in my life, and there was also that element of frustration because I even started a monastic path. I thought I might have wanted to become a monk. And at the same time, it was like, why doesn't meditation give me the peace and tranquility I so crave?
Sure.
Fucking hell, why not? So I had this love-hate relationship with meditation because I felt
Mm-hmm.
so uncomfortable in meditation.
Mm-hmm.
And I
So if I
was
can,
successful. Yeah.
was just say, I mean, what I'm hearing is you're suffering, but also suffering in isolation. That you didn't have connection in a sense to a framework of what was going on for you, or
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
I'm assuming a lot here, but I think
No,
too it
no.
can be one of those things where I have this experience going on inside of me. It's really uncomfortable. I don't know what to make of it, and I feel kind of alone with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I know it was a family trait. I see it now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you learn how to relate to life.
Mm-hmm.
So I realized that, it's okay. That's the way life is. That's the way I have to navigate it. Okay, let's find stuff that'll make me think about something else or give me some kind of pleasure where there
Sure.
is discomfort deep
Sure. Some
inside.
type of distraction or.
Right. So everything but diagnosing it and giving it a name and dealing with it. I would do
Right.
occasional, holistic treatments and whatnot. But
So in a sense, it was just kind of normal. I mean, it wasn't
yeah,
pleasant.
exactly.
It was normal
It
in a
was
sense
just
that
my
this is
life.
just life. This is, yeah, it's just how this is.
It's my life. It was my mom's life. And, I get it. For some of us, that's the way it is. So, meh.
Yep.
And Italy, as we were talking before earlier, is such, there's this element of discretion, of privacy. You don't want to say too much about yourself. So also having, a psychological condition of any kind makes you a sick person. That's why even today, people hardly go to a psychologist or a psychotherapist because for them, it means admitting they're sick, not simply needing help on a psychological level. So that's something that I dealt with a lot. And even my family, we weren't lovers of that part of medicine or of science. And so we stayed away from it. No diagnoses, no therapies of any kind. So that's what I rolled with for that part of my life. And I mean, it didn't stop me from becoming relatively successful. I was a successful therapist. I was a successful speaker. I was a successful teacher. And, my life appeared good. And as I say in the podcast with Abdi, when 2012 came along and, there was all that talk about the 21st of December, 2012, and, where something would happen, that was a time where I was leading large groups into guided meditations and I would channel for them. And there was this message coming through over and over again, prepare yourself because a big change is going to come. And if you're not ready for it, it's really going to hit you hard. And what do you know? It wasn't.
It applied to you too.
No, it probably mainly for me. That's who it was, not necessarily for the audience or the participants.
The message is for me. Okay.
Exactly. But at that time, it was like, you poor souls, prepare yourselves because it's going to get tough and rough. Sorry.
Sure. Take your time.
So there was this combination within me of, I don't want to see this. And at the same time, I was doing work with the school. I was doing my training, and the training involved a lot of work on yourself. And there was this underlying intentionality on my side. And I tell this anecdote in the podcast with Abdi as well, where I was watching this NBA game, this playoff game, and there was this interview. They were interviewing Greg Popovich, who is even at the day the coach for the San Antonio Spurs, and they were a beautiful team, so much teamwork, so much humbleness. And the interviewer was asking, how are these players playing so well, getting along with each other so well? And his reply was, these men got over themselves a long time ago. And that really hit me. And I had a lot of narcissistic traits. I was very seductive with women. I was very controlling. I was very manipulative. So that was a part of me. And that was how I coped with life and my own suffering.
It was an adaptive way of being in the world.
Exactly. That was my mask, like Pierre Racos would call it. And at that point, when I heard that, I said, you know what? I want to get over myself or this kind of self I've become. And I think I made a vow in that moment. I decided that I wanted to get over myself. And a few months later, all hell broke loose as far as I was concerned. So I think that's the two main elements, as far as I'm concerned, that led to the dark night of the soul, which, I am going to talk about. But the element of not wanting to see a certain part of what I was experiencing, not really wanting to see how much I was suffering and deal with it. And on the other hand, an underlying intentionality of wanting to go there, really wanting to go there, but not knowing how to.
Yeah, and that's a powerful tension, isn't it?
It's a very powerful tension,
Yeah.
a very powerful tension. And it's a moment of surrender, I think, where you sort of ask a higher power to help you with that, because you're kind of stuck, because, two opposite tensions kind of hold you stuck in place. And probably, I would say a blessing in disguise today, but back then it was a huge curse for me.
Sure.
But that's when it all started.
Yeah, and the idea of at some level, making a commitment to yourself, right? That something has to change. And so I really relate to that, sort of this idea of, my life from the outside anyway, looking pretty good, probably experiencing, throughout my life periods of, the saying falling off the horse, or sort of stumbling a bit and kind of pulling myself back up and sort of reorienting, but coming to a place where fundamentally something has to change. And sort of coming to a place of surrendering, to opening up to whatever that might be. There's almost an invitation, and not a conscious sort of, oh, I welcome whatever pain is coming my way, but just a sense that fundamentally, at a very foundational level, something has to change.
Yeah.
So if that's what you're talking about, then I very much relate to that sort of as a precursor to me entering into this period of my life, this dark night period of my life.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I had a deep belief and faith on the other side, the way I perceived it back then. I had a very strong connection to my guides and whatnot. But in that moment, I really made a specific request. Help me get over myself. Not asking how, just asking for help.
Asking for help.
And a very simple event took place, which was a powerful breakup with a partner, just the nth emotional dependency, but it was particularly tough. And my back, and I had an acute back strain, and I couldn't move anymore. This combination, for some reason, opened up the whole Pandora's box or vase. And it was literally the straw that broke the camel's back. It was my back. And that's where it all started.
Carrying some type of burdens, right? Carrying some type of burdens. Yeah. And then almost a perfect storm quality. Something needed to sort of come into place to sort of create the conditions of opening up to surrender. Yeah.
And so I started having huge panic attacks and anxiety all the time. And that was the time when I was fighting with it. I thought I could manage it, but this thing was just bigger than what I could manage. And I got to a point where I was unable to do just about anything autonomously, except going to the bathroom possibly. I couldn't work with clients anymore. I couldn't live by myself anymore. I basically lost close to all autonomy and had to just leave and go to live in the countryside, countryside of Florence with my dad, and refer all my clients, leave my apartment, and just go stay with someone who could be with me 24/7.
Wow, that's a huge shift. Sort of, here you are in life, holding things together, looking pretty good, and then it just collapses. And I relate to this too, this sort of really coming into a debilitated or disabled state almost.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yep.
Thinking you got it all figured out. You might have even found the perfect partner. And then everything is...
this quality, like, I got this, I got this, and there is this sort of managerial part of me, this quality, it's sort of like holding things together, right?
Yeah, control.
And when that collapses, it collapses.
Right. The illusion of control.
That's right.
And that's why, to me, today, that was such a precious moment
Mm.
because, I love Abdi's expression. I got pummeled into surrender.
Yeah.
Because if nobody had done this for me, I still want to believe somebody helped me with this. And
Mm.
back then, somebody had taken away my life from me.
Mm-hmm.
But now I see that it was, I was such a big controller that if that had not happened, I might have gone my whole life without giving up control, trying to
That's
keep
right.
such a strong grip on
Sure.
things, life, partners, relationships, and work.
Yeah, and I was living like what I'm hearing from you. I was living in a place of I got this a lot of the time. I got this. I can control this. I
Mhm.
sort of keep it together, and it was
Yeah,
going to take a lot for me to get to a place of I can't. And that's kind of where I ended up. I just can't.
right,
Right? Whatever it is that I think I need to do to sort of maintain whatever the picture of whatever it is I'm supposed to be, I just can't do that anymore. And
right.
there's sort of this collapse.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
The collapse accompanied by the sense of defeat,
Yeah.
the shame, the
Yeah.
sense of failure.
Yeah. And so for me, that was a period of, I think, of doing battle with my own inner critic in a sense. It was
Yes,
just
absolutely.
because the critic
Absolutely.
for me, my inner critic was the part of me that sort of enforced and motivated me to sort of try to maintain control, right?
Yeah.
To do all these things. And
Yeah.
when that collapses, the critic just became so amplified,
Hmm.
right? And
Right.
it was just almost paralyzing for a while,
Yeah.
right? To sort of just be there stuck with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the control wanting to come back. I got to fix this. I got to
That's
fix
right.
this. I got
There's
to
gotta be
find a way
something.
to fix this. There
Yeah.
got to be something. So you keep going through the same motions you used to.
That's right.
Okay, I'll do this. I'll meditate. Or I'll ask guidance. Or I'll talk to my supervisor. She's good and whatnot. And
That's right.
nothing works. Nothing
And that's
works.
the pummeling, isn't it? That's the pummeling.
Correct.
And it's from the
Correct.
grasping. There's something that I can hold on to, something that can put this back right, something that will allow me to climb back up out of this, right?
Right.
And again, at part of the time, I would be like, okay, I can't, I surrender. But it was this constant sort of parts of me sort of coming up again to try to find a way to sort of make it okay again.
Yeah.
And there is this, and I love the term too from Abdi, that pummeling, because, and I don't love the process, but it's very
Right,
accurate.
of course.
It's very apt to sort of, there is this sort of, to get me to surrender, I need to keep bumping up against things and it not happening the way that I thought it would.
Right.
I thought it was supposed to, yeah.
And the more you try to regain control, I'm that person. I have to go back to being that person.
That's right. And if I'm not
And-
that, then what? Right? That's sort of the
Correct.
question.
Exactly.
But there is this
Exactly.
almost like caught in a spider web. The more I squirmed, the tighter it got.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, because on the other side, there's the sense of loss. There's a void. If I'm not that person, I am nothing. I'm not even at that place where I'm asking, okay, so who am I? Fuck no. It's like I am nothing and I can't be nothing. And that's where the anguish came in. It wasn't only depression, it was anguish. It was a sense of complete loss of identity. Who am I? I am nothing. And at that time, I would wake up in the morning and I would pray to die. I wasn't thinking about suicide back then, but I was praying that I would die.
I just want it to end.
Make it end.
The pain.
Make it stop.
The pain.
Yeah,
The anguish.
exactly. Make it stop.
And yeah. And I think what we're talking about at some level is moving to a place of grief around this. Going through an intense grief. And at first, it's just being in the anguish, isn't it? It's just feeling
Yeah.
the intensity of the pain. But you said loss. You used the word loss. There's a loss that comes through this process. And I think there's a grieving that happens. The grieving of who it is that I thought I was. There's a death, in a sense. That happens.
That came later because at that moment I was so terrified
Yeah.
that I couldn't even connect to my pain. I was
That's right.
so terrified. I said, I can't live one more minute like that. And I could see myself looking, I have to stay 10 minutes, 1 hour, 2 hours. The mere looking into the future was a source of so much anguish that it was. And back then I was still clinging to the idea that, oh, no, just natural remedies, meditation, or some kind of, and thank God one of my brotherly friends is a nurse, and he kept telling me, Ian, you need meds. You need meds. And I'm like, no, I don't want to be, I don't want to become a vegetable staring at the wall and drooling over my shirt. I'm not taking meds. And I was so ignorant about meds back then that I was convinced that anti-anxiety or antidepressants were just that kind of med that would make you, numb you down so much that you weren't a person anymore. So I resisted. And then, I just got pummeled harder until I just had to say, okay, fuck it. Feel more resentment, feel more failure, feel more shame, feel more everything. And, and say, okay, I'm so helpless. I'm so hopeless. I'm so anguished. I'm so lost that, I'll just do whatever is needed. That if this is my last resort, okay, I'll go for it. And that's when things started getting better. Thank God.
Yeah. But being in, and we'll go into that too, but just being in that place of pain day in and day out. For me, this was, and there was a lot of other stuff going on for me too, which at some point maybe I'll bring that perspective in too. But,
sure.
Right behind me right here, it was, and let me just say, I didn't know emotional, psychological pain could be so physically painful. To come into a place of just in my body feeling a sense of agony and writhing almost. It was just, there was so much emotional and psychological stuff going on. And I had all kinds of stretching, and I had this, those massage tools to sort of massage myself and swaddle. There was a lot of physical stuff to sort of move through this process. It was very visceral for me.
Yeah.
And again, I did not know I was going to make it out. I really didn't. And there was times and again, and I'm glad we brought up suicide, because most people have a suicidal part of us. It's an ejection button. It's a last resort to say, if I'm in too much pain, there's a way out. Yeah. Right. It's a last resort place. And I was bumping up against that. Yeah. Right. Because it was pain day in and day out. And I didn't know I was going to make it through. I really, and we'll talk about this too. I think, maybe there's things we hold on to along the way, whatever, but I did not know I was going to make it out of this. I really didn't at the time. Yeah. I really did not.
Yeah.
So I wasn't actively suicidal, but I remember thinking, if this just ended, that would be okay.
Oh yeah. It would be actually welcome.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would walk like 8 hours a day, fast walk all around the hills, around the house, 8 hours a day. My body was in so much terror that I had to constantly release all this anxiety and walk incessantly and just exhaust myself so I could sleep at night. And I remember I was talking to Abdi back then, and he told me, your adrenals are completely exhausted. I was in such continuous terror that my adrenals were just blown to pieces. So yeah, the body is hit really hard in those moments. It's really tough on the body as well. And the Latins said, mens sana in corpore sano, a healthy mind and a healthy body. But when your body starts being so, suffering and so weak and so anxious, going from anxious to exhausted, from anxious and tense to exhausted, then, your mind can't be healthy, can't be well, can't find a safe space to exist in.
Yeah, and again, in retrospect, I've come to understand that there was a physical incapacitation, but I think it was a part of a larger picture of me learning not to run, right? Not to run from what was going on inside. There was, again, this incapacitation of me just not being able to escape. Sort of this wisdom of no escape, of just being like, at some level, it's time to be with what's here, right? This sort of what's there. And
beautiful.
That's sort of a framing that I've sort of come to understand for myself around that. A real sort of incapacitation across the board. to
Yeah.
learn not to run. And again, all the distractions that I used to do, and I had some chemical distractions, but
Mm-hmm.
workaholism and performance and all kinds of stuff that
Mm.
I could make anything into an addiction or a compulsion, video
Right.
games or working out, whatever it is. But for
Yeah.
me at that point, it was coming to a place of it's time to sit. It's time to be here and to
Yeah.
learn to not to run. And for me, looking back, unfortunately, it was a fairly brutal process. Meditation was also a part of what I was doing. And I would just sit there. I'm like, I'm just going to sit here. I'm going to feel everything. I'm going to sit here. And there was a brutal quality to it. I wish
Yeah.
it could have been more gentle. And I
Yeah.
found greater gentleness through that process. But there was sort of this central idea of I'm learning not to run away. I'm learning to actually to turn towards myself,
Yeah.
to learn how to be with the parts of myself that are in distress, and the parts of myself, quite honestly, that I'd been pushing away
Mm-hmm.
for a very long time. Like you said, in childhood, the parts of myself that were not as welcome, to
Yeah.
bring emotional distress or maybe
Mm-hmm.
uncomfortable feelings, things like that. And
Yeah.
and it was a quality of I learned to keep those sort of tucked aside. I'm a sensitive person too. It's more comfortable for other people if I sort of can set that aside. And it was time at this dark night of the soul for that to come forward, for
Yeah.
me to sort of go through a process of learning to be with that and to create new relationship to it. And it was painful process.
Yeah, it is. And it also feels like a very patient process as far as the process is concerned, because I know that back then, most of the time I was um, completely running away from it. I didn't want to stay with it. I didn't.
Mm-mm.
That's why I would walk so much. But the process stayed there. It's patient. It's
That's
there.
right.
It goes nowhere.
That's right.
And I can remember moments of just sitting in front of the fireplace. I was reading back then I think it was Johnson's book on symbiosis. That was what, brought it all to happen, emotional dependency and whatnot, and still trying to find fixes for what had happened. But in truth, I was realizing that who I had been up to that moment was not a sustainable formula or
Mm-hmm.
solution or form. And
That's right.
that's when I decided to, my house had crumbled down. I decided to dig out the foundation as well.
Mm-hmm.
I really said, I want to start all over again with
Mm-hmm.
who am I?
Mm-hmm.
Who am I? And that's the moment after many months, after I started taking the meds and my system, had started pacifying a little bit or stabilizing anyway, I really
Mm-hmm.
felt I wanted to stay in that. And that lasted a long time because that sense of not knowing, of unknown, of
Mm-hmm.
loss, of that
Mm-hmm.
persona, of that personality of who I thought I had been is
Mm-hmm.
huge, because it's not easy it's easy to ask myself, who am I really? But not knowing the other personality not being there anymore, having been
Mm-hmm.
completely deleted, is brutal. Is absolutely brutal. You have to start building one brick at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And you look down and you got 5 bricks. That's all you have. That's all your house is.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me about 2 years to get out of that
Yeah.
place, to build a decent foundation and decent walls that could be called a house.
Mm-hmm. So what was there had to crumble, and then
Mm-hmm.
going through that process and then creating a new foundation for something different. And I really relate to this sort of being in a place of not knowing.
Yeah.
That's where the grasping starts to fall away,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like, okay, nothing that I grasp for is working. There's nothing that I can do, no escape from this, right?
Yeah.
So I have to be here, and I have to just sort of admit, this is the surrender. I don't know. I
Yeah.
really don't know. And I would meditate on those words over and over again. I don't know. And the tears would be falling down my face,
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah.
don't know.
Beautiful.
And oh, what a brutal place to be in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Looking at
So
it today, I see it so beautiful the way you're telling it, and at the same
mm,
time is,
yeah,
being in it is,
that's right. That the rear view mirror perspective today is
mhm,
very different than the perspective of what's going on in that moment. So
yeah,
I have a quote here. I'm a Star Wars fan, so it's a Yoda quote.
mhm,
But train yourself to let go of everything you fear to lose. And that
mm,
was again that sort of place of just
mm,
there's nothing to hold on to. And I
mm,
am letting go of everything that I sort of think I know, think that I am, and it's
mhm.
just this I don't know. And it's this surrender place.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So and then you start building a new foundation.
yeah. And then you start building a new foundation. And as teacher, as a speaker, as a um, counselor, as I guided workshops, I guided meditations, I did channelings. I really realized that how much I had been using the spiritual realm as my way out of relationships, which I was not good at.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
I found my security there because I could not find relationships, because I would used to
Mm.
be controlling in relationships,
Yeah.
or, just get what I wanted from relationships. And so the only security and safety I found in spirituality. And one
Yeah.
of the greatest gifts was that once my condition started, I lost every contact with the other side. I could not
Mm-hmm.
feel or hear anything at
Mm.
all.
Mm-hmm.
So, also that sense of abandonment, of
Mm-hmm.
betrayal, of
Mm-hmm.
anger, of fuck you, whoever you
Mm-hmm.
are, and for whatever reason chose not to stay with me in the moment I needed you, in the moment I needed you
Mm-hmm.
most.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So that was also a huge process of letting go. And part of the reconstruction process was exactly that, of saying, what do I want to rely on?
Mm-hmm.
Who do I want to rely on? On my
Mm-hmm.
guides, on God, on spirituality, on the other
Mm-hmm.
side?
Mm-hmm.
Or, realizing who has helped me all these months getting back on my feet?
Mm-hmm.
And it was human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that that was the opportunity for me to connect to human beings in a
Mm-hmm.
truthful, in a profound, in an honest, in an authentic way,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what I needed most since I was a child, and which I was never able to really develop into a healthy form.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate you highlighting that, Ian.
Mm.
One of the things we keep mentioning Abdi, clearly we're both
Mhm.
influenced by his perspectives, but one thing that really stuck out to me, he said there's two paths towards awakening and healing and growth. There's a spiritual path and there's a psychological path. And they are very much intertwined, but you
Mm.
can't replace doing work in one with the other.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so while we look for connection to maybe something bigger than ourselves in a spiritual framework, and we can do lots of work in that, there's also the very real concrete connections that we have or don't have, or how we experience that with actual other people. That's another source of connection. And if we don't do that relational work, the psychological, emotional,
Hmm.
relational work with other human beings,
Yeah.
then the spiritual just becomes a bypass, a distraction for
Correct.
not doing that type of work.
Right.
And
Right.
I think part of what I'm hearing too in your healing process, transformation in relation to other people is
Hmm.
trust. Like, who do I count on? Who is there for me? How do I learn to trust? What does trust look like with other human beings?
Yeah.
And so for me, I come to an understanding around childhood trauma, or just
Hmm.
the dents and scratches we get through childhood. Most people have them to varying degrees and flavors,
Yeah.
right? Some very extreme. But, we come from childhood and there's adaptive ways of being. We learn this, right? But to me, what we're talking about around childhood trauma is a wound of trust more than anything else,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So one of the arenas I sort of walk in talks about childhood trauma. The rules of family dysfunction, the rules of childhood trauma is don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. And there is an isolative quality around that.
Yeah.
And it's a wound more than anything else of trust. And how do I bring other people into my life in ways that feel safe,
Yeah.
affirming, connected,
Yeah.
right? And that, for me, was a large part of this foundation that was shaky.
Yeah.
The ideas of how that's supposed to work. And again, you mentioned some things sounded like maybe manipulation and control, that these were things that I employed, adaptive ways of being in the world, having not learned maybe other ways to do it. These are things that I employed to create love in my life. I would do these things and I called it love.
Right.
Right. But to sort of get a rework to say those strategies, those adaptive ways of trying to find people to be close with are unsustainable
Yeah.
and don't lead to the connection that I'm actually craving.
Exactly. Exactly. And that crave for a connection, for an authentic connection, was actually induced because the moment you have to drop all your defenses and your armor and your shield, then you experience your authentic self and realize that with some people you can actually relax and you're safe. And they're there for you in a loving, supportive way.
Yeah. And for me, it was coming in contact with my vulnerability, my sensitivities, my vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
And then learning how it is that I might start to bring some of that to another person, which of course was the most terrifying thing that I could imagine.
Absolutely. Yeah. 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 So thanks to my loved ones, I was able to get back on my feet. And since then, my way of working completely changed to a way of working with people to help them reestablish that contact with others and work through that so that they can have an ever more fulfilling and nurturing experience. And really getting in touch with who they are and what they need. Because needs to me are at the basis of everybody's life. Their work,
on the
their
same page with that.
relationship, everything starts from our basic needs. And not wanting to see these needs because of idealized self-images or, whatever, does not help us.
Sure. And I've been able to trace that back to early on, where in childhood, I oftentimes had, in my experience, had a lot of unmet needs.
Right.
And I've also come to understand my feelings as a messaging system for my needs, being met or not met. If my needs are met, I generally feel the feelings we might call good feelings, but really the feelings that we prefer to feel. And if I'm walking around with a bunch of unmet needs, I feel distress. I feel the bad feelings or the feelings that are uncomfortable to feel. And so I had to turn off my messaging system very early on because of these unmet needs. I was in distress of sort of these needs not being met. So I turned those parts of myself off. And so again, my dark night of the soul, my awakening, was really sort of a process of turning that back on again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, where like the fuse that controlled the access to those feelings just blew and you felt them all together.
Yeah.
They came all back.
Yes. And again, I had a history with, chemicals. I don't drink anymore, but that part of my dark soul process was that I had actually found medications very early on. I had my full-blown panic attacks when I was in college around age 20, 21. And so when you're talking about panic attacks, and it was impossible. Like that was an impossible situation.
Yeah.
I actually found medication at that point, which made it more manageable.
Right.
However, I stayed on those medications for 25 years. And so my dark night of the soul process was actually a process of removing that also,
Right.
right? It was going in and doing a bunch of inner work, but it was also removing alcohol. I quit smoking. It was caffeine. It was a number of types of, it was antidepressants. It was benzodiazepine tranquilizers. But I had been on all these and they kind of propped up things too. So on the one hand, they saved my life
Yeah.
at that time. I really believe that. Like these things saved my life.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I sort of got stuck in that and I would try to sort of get off and I would feel more anxiety and panicky and I'm busy in life and I just don't have the time. And of course, the doctor's like, well, it's just, it's like a diabetic with insulin. You just take it, you have a chemical imbalance. And I just sort of came to a place where I'm like, that feels like part of the unsustainability of my life right now. So part of my process was a 4-year process of very slowly, incrementally removing these things that I had taken very regularly, day after day for 25 years.
Right.
And then bringing all of that back on. There's a numbing quality that takes the level down again and again to modulate things and to move through very difficult processes. They are an important tool. But I had got to a point where I needed to remove it. And so I had to go through a very slow process, 4-year process of just incrementally, just a little bit at a time, because, it's withdrawal, but it's also all these systems coming back online, right?
Absolutely.
And the overwhelming quality of what it's like to have the felt sensations and the emotions, the sensitivities kind of all come back online again.
Yeah.
And to learn to live with that,
Yeah.
right? That's kind of what I feel like I probably was running away from, was that. And I had to go slowly and incrementally to move through a process of turning those systems back online.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
And now
So,
they're gifts,
yeah,
right?
right.
And we were
Exactly.
talking about, so,
That's where I was
my
going.
first degree in college was in psychology and I thought I was going to be a therapist and I worked in that field for a while and I just ran into my wounding over and over. I didn't know it at the time.
Yeah.
It was too intense. Right. And I shifted gears and I went back to school and I worked in the .coms or business world and had my own company. And then through my dark soul process, I realized I'm in a different place, right? I'm moving through a different place. I think I can be who it is that I really want to be, a healer, someone who's working with other people. And I think maybe I can do that safely now.
Yeah.
Like maybe I can do that. Maybe I have enough connection with myself. I've done enough work that I could actually be available to other people in healthy ways.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's opened a process. I went back to school at age 50, right, to get a master's degree, to be a psychotherapist. I have coaching business. So it is, things have, while I lost so much and I grieved so much and it was so painful,
Yeah.
it's also opened the door to living very differently.
Yeah.
In much deeper ways and having gifts that were not available, that were part of what got turned off, now available in how it is that I work with other people. I have other people in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. And I
I think I'm
think
hearing
that's exactly.
some of that experience with you too. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's exactly what allows us to do our job and why so many people come looking for that, because it's really about, even if many times we receive people who come to us because they felt our energy, they listened to us talk, they saw us, they said, I want something that's there. I feel that person can help me. Many times they are not willing to accept whatever they're going through. So, what I think determines the quality of our work is not, the diplomas or the books we've read. It's really the presence, the ability to create that space of absolute unconditional acceptance of whatever is here now.
And learning to do that within myself has allowed me to be with other
Exactly.
people. When they
Exactly.
bring that to me, I can go to the scary places. I've been
Right.
there. I
Right.
can be with you as you're walking through it too.
Right.
And people feel that.
Right. Exactly.
Feel it.
And I've been working with many psychotherapists who came to me, MDs, nurses, psychotherapists, neuropsychiatrists, they kept coming, they kept coming. And in a way, it was that element of, it's not about changing people. It's not about fixing people. It's not about curing people, unless you're a neuropsychiatrist and you got to find the right combination of psychopharmacology to help them. But the intention is not to fix you. The intention is to stay here with whatever is going on and create that safe space where you can exist. And if you can't create it within yourself, then you can't create it with patients. And to me, it's been fascinating where more than half of my clients throughout the years have been psychotherapists, doctors, nurses, and psychologists and neuropsychiatrists, because they felt they wanted to be able to create that space. Teach me to create that space for my patients. And okay, let's start with you. And harmonic induction is such a powerful element. Because if you are in an energetic space of, wherever you are is not okay, you shouldn't be feeling that. Even if I'm merely thinking it, the other person is in contact with my energy field. They are going to feel that there's something wrong with whatever it is they're feeling.
That's right.
The moment you start being accepting, loving of whatever is here now within yourself, then they feel it too, and they feel like they can relax in that and open up. You were saying something, please.
No, I really relate to that. And for me, as I work with people, I will notice the parts of me arising at times with an agenda or wanting to fix or thinking I have an idea about what can make it better. And for me as a healer, it's a constant process of paying attention to my own parts of myself that can get involved in the process and having those parts step back a bit. Because when those parts step back, then there is this natural field, a natural field of compassion, of calmness, of creativity, of courage. There's a natural, you might refer to it as sort of a true self or an inner wisdom or an inner loving parent, that there is a unconditionally loving, unconditionally present part of myself, which more than anything, I think is what most people need.
Absolutely.
It's what I needed.
Yes.
It's what I needed.
Yes.
Right. And so, yes, there's problem solving as a part of what I do and, weighing things, and there's a cognitive component. But the most foundational piece, and because I think it relates to what I was saying, trust. To trust that I can bring whatever it is that's going on with me and I can bring that out into the world. I can bring that to you and it can be okay.
Correct. And
any fixing or any of that can distract from that process as there's a feeling of judgment. If I need to fix it, then something's not okay.
Right.
So having those parts of myself that can have those agendas step back because they're there, I continue to work with them. Yeah. But in my work with people, as much as possible to really just bring presence.
Correct. Absolutely. Presence, contact, and listening. To me, they're the three elements of foundation for this kind of work. And it's to take it a step further, when I work with psychotherapists, many times it's, why do you want to fix the other person? Why do you feel compelled to provide a solution, to provide a fix? And it's always going back to ourselves, to not being able to stay with the other person's condition because it resonates with something within us. And then that's the opportunity. That's why our patients are our biggest teachers, because they show us what we're uncomfortable with and what we need to keep working with.
And I think a lot of folks move into the healing professions because they are uncomfortable with discomfort.
Absolutely.
And they want to try to help people with that.
Correct.
Right?
Absolutely.
So a lot of people with their own wounding, go into professions to sort of, well, I understand how uncomfortable this is. Let me go see if I can fix this for you, help you, or ease your pain. Right? But the underlying idea is there's an inner discomfort that I have with your discomfort.
Right.
And so for someone who's going to be healing, that's a central piece to work with, I think.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And so I think something that I feel I really want to put out there is the fact that these events are life-changing. And these events do change us. Not only our lives change, but we change. And it's not like when they're over, it's over. We start seeing something that's always been there, and something that we might have to coexist for the rest of our lives. So part of the process is really learning to caretake us, to understand how fragile, how sensitive, how vulnerable we are, and build the rest of our lives on that, where we can express our sensitivity as a beautiful talent to help others, but at the same time, to protect that, not to go back to our lives they were before, because we just can't. We decided to take that armor off. You can't go back the way you are now. You're just going to get pummeled again somewhat. So, and we're going to get so tense going towards that we have to step back. So it's really about resizing your life as well. I would do workshops and conferences with hundreds of people, and now it's all down to workshops with maybe 15 people maximum. And this number of hours I work, this day I take it off, these days I take off. And it's really about keep going back to myself. What's right for me? What feels right? How can I preserve this delicate instrument at the service of others?
There's something precious in yourself worth tending to.
Absolutely.
Right?
Beautifully said.
And so all these things that I gave up, chemicals or ways of being, adaptive ways of being, I've come to understand. I replace that with self-care. I replace that with me being open to all parts of the fullness of my humanness. And coming to a place, there's no bad parts within me. There's parts that, are problematic in certain ways, but, there's nothing bad within me. Right. That it's sort of a welcoming of the fullness of who I am, and then learning and then transforming relationships to these different parts of myself around compassion. Right. And learning how to tend to the needs of each of these parts of myself and making that a priority.
And they're absolutely individual to each one of us.
Yes.
Because in my case, Xanax is a beautiful friend that's always with me in case I need it. So there's no judgment around that either. I keep it in my pocket wherever I go. I know those panic attacks might come back. There are certain triggers that are still there. I'm working with them, on them, and at the same time knowing that maybe the time has not come for them to, they're still part of the family. So I welcome them in a way. No, I don't welcome them. I don't like them. But when they come, I know it's part of the process. I know they'll come eventually. And in a way, I'm accepting of the fact they might come. I'm still in resistance. I'm not completely surrendered to everything that happened. And probably the panic attacks are a manifestation of my resistance, but that's who I am today. It's a gradual process. Even if it's been, 10, 12 years since those events, I still, I'm still there. That's who I am. That's what I'm working with. This is what Ian in this lifetime is experiencing. So, okay, fine. That's right. Let's do it.
And the question is, what is kind? What's effective and what's kind? Right? And everyone's path is different. And, the tool set that I've developed is going to be different. And a lot of people, just tell me what I need to do and I'll do the right thing. What are the 5 easy bullet points, right? It just doesn't work that way. It's learning to tend to myself is a very unique process. We can learn from each other in how it is that we approach the process. But what you need to tend to your parts, to bring a sense of ease or comfort or trust or security, right? And whatever those things are in a process is going to be unique to you. And again, no judgment from me, right? I have my things that I'm working on and I have my tool set and other people can have their ideas about what that is, but I'm learning what it is I need to do to take care of myself and make that a priority.
Right. And I can help you find yours. Gladly. I have no judgment. There can be so many tools. I have no prior ideas. I know what's healthy. I know what's unhealthy. So I can help you find a healthy way to deal with your stuff. But beyond that, you're the most authoritative person for yourself. So, find that love for yourself and find the ways that you can live with yourself at the best of your ability.
Yeah, and again, like I didn't get all the sort of lessons around self-care very early on in my life. And so
Yeah.
one of the phrases I've excuse me, come across is becoming my own loving parent. And it's sort
Yeah.
of learning how to tend to myself like I am a part of me anyway is the most precious thing there. And
Yeah.
and that is what I didn't have. If there's something I would say that really transformed through my dark night of the soul process, it was a resistance to that because I didn't believe I was worth it. I didn't believe it was a priority. I didn't believe that it mattered, right? And again, not knowing that sort of overtly,
Mm-hmm.
but where I am now to sort of see that I have had to come into a place of seeing myself as precious
Yeah.
and that there's something within me worth tending to and making that a priority.
Yes.
And I had a lot of resistance to it
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of crumbling away, but
Mm-hmm.
coming to a place of incrementally building internal trust
Yeah.
with my parts that I won't abandon them,
Mm-hmm.
right? I won't abandon myself.
Yeah.
So
Beautiful.
I think we're at the end of our time. We said about an hour.
Yeah. Perfectly on time.
I sort of skimmed, I had made some notes and I
Mm-hmm.
didn't refer to them, but I know that actually we probably covered most of what was on there.
Lovely.
So I really appreciate you. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this, but
Thank
also
you.
your willingness to share your story, to
Yeah.
bring your presence to this conversation.
No, my pleasure.
And
Thanks for making it happen.
so is there anything else? I mean, is there anything that you would want people to know about you and sort of what you're doing and how to contact you? It's ianritter.com, right? I mean, they can go
Yeah,
there, but
that's my website.
anything else as far as what's happening in your life now that you would want people to know about or just
Well, I mean, I have a few podcast episodes on the English part of my website. Most of my material is in Italian, unfortunately, but I work with many people around the world. I have many patients around the world, and I work with everybody. So if anybody feels drawn to my energy and my way of working and approaching personal work, feel free to contact me through the website. And thank you for this opportunity. I appreciate
bet.
it.
Well, I hope maybe we can do it again sometime. So I really
Sure.
enjoyed chatting with you and
Yeah,
I
gladly.
wish you the best and look forward to our paths crossing again at some point.
Thanks, Lou. Absolutely.
Okay.
Take good care.
Thanks.
Ciao,
Okay.
ciao.